Pettit, your certified life and wellness coach. I have a great interview in line for you today with the author, Christen Bensten. She has written a memoir that is really hitting the press big these days called Starving. She shares her difficult yet hopeful story of growing up in a constant state of fear, managing her anxiety and depression on her own, and what it took to find love and healing so that she now is the thriving woman that she is. She is a small business owner of a very successful business called Blue Egg Brown Nest, and woman owned. And I will include the links to that in the show notes. And she's been published in the Washington Post, Cottage Living Magazine, Arlington Magazine, Romantic Homes Magazine, Freshstyle Magazine, and several other publications, including the book Southern Style. She has shared her YouTube tutorials to millions of people on her Blue Egg Brown Nest channel. And now here she is sharing her story. And today I want you to tune in because we speak of many things. We speak of boundaries. We speak of expectations. We speak of healing childhood trauma. We speak of also maybe healing some trauma that you've had that, you know, is affecting you now. So many of us have had the experience of being told we're not enough, or to be quiet, you're too emotional, we get into it all today. So listen in and join me with this great interview with Christen. Let's go, warriors. All right, listeners, here we are. We've got Christen Bensten on the Love Your Life show. Thank you so much for coming today, Christen.
Thank you, Susie, for having me. I feel so grateful to be here. I have to say, I love your podcast. I listen to it. I take notes on it.
Yay.
I try to live by a lot of your practical tools, and I text it to all my friends. I mean,
my gosh.
truly. I mean,
Yay.
the bingo, I think I told you, I love the bingo card that you talk about, which is, we don't have to get into it, but like, you know, knowing the expectations of knowing what you're kind of getting into and saying, yep, that's my mom being my mom. And
Yeah.
you have just so many great tools. So thank you for having me.
I am so glad. Well, I'm so glad to have you here. And I am so glad that some of those tools have been able to help you, because as I want you to dive into a little bit, you've had quite an interesting past. Could you tell us a little bit about where you got to write this book, where you are, what you're doing?
Yeah. I guess I'll start by saying I always knew I was going to write my story. It was just a matter of when was the time right? When had I marinated enough on the life lessons and the pain? And when could I write it where I wasn't reactionary, where it wasn't just anger? Because I did go through a period of about, I don't know, 10 years when I was doing the therapy, doing the meds, doing the body work, doing the yoga, doing the massage, doing the acupuncture, doing the doing everything I could, because I'm a really proactive kind of person, and we live in that kind of area where everything is very proactive. And I had started it maybe, I don't know, 16 years ago, and I just wasn't ready. I wasn't in the right place. But then when COVID started, and some of the same painful, shaming, repetitious behaviors from my family started kind of coming at me again. I mean, we're having this pandemic. There's nothing greater than what's happening out in the world, and somehow I get blamed for it. Somehow it's Christen's fault. Somehow Christen wants to lock herself away with her kids and not see her mom, and so Christen must be responsible for COVID. And I was like, no. And you know what? And I'm not willing to take that responsibility. I'm pretty sure I didn't cause COVID.
Yeah.
Like, that's one thing I could say. Maybe growing up, I was always taught, like many of your listeners and your people that you interview, it's too much, too sensitive, too dramatic. Then I was too aloof, too private. It was always something's wrong. And so when COVID hit, I was like, no, this is not right. And I sat down on the edge of my bed. This is what I was going to do. I was either going to do what you say, which is to do that fast and furious writing and then tear it up.
Yeah.
Right? I
Yep.
love that. I
Don't
taught
put
my
a
daughter
crank
that.
on, right,
What is
right
it
the
called?
rip.
Write a rip. I love it. And I went in thinking, no, I'm going to journal every day
Mm,
about what this pandemic is like for me. Because wouldn't that be kind of interesting?
mm,
Kind of like a archaeologist kind of like, let's dig
yeah,
through what it's like for some, because we're writing history right now,
yeah,
right?
mhm,
So I sat on the edge of my bed because all my kids were in their rooms and the animals were barking and meowing and everything else. And so the edge of my bed, the only little piece of privacy, I'm sure you get
you
it.
can have, right.
And I started writing and I was like, no, I really want to go back. I really
Mhm,
want to go back to the beginning. And I think I'm ready. I think I'm
uh-huh,
ready to tell the story where it's not just me reacting, it's rather me saying, hey, this is for little Kristen. This is to clarify what it was like for me. This is for me to say my piece. I mean, Brene Brown says, when you own your story, you get to write the ending.
mhm,
And
yeah,
being in the work for the last 15 years, it's like, oh yeah, I want to tell it from my side, right?
yeah. Oh, yeah.
I don't want anyone else telling my narrative. I always go back to also the other quote that always gets to me and sparks tears is in Hamilton when George Washington says, that song, like, who lives, who dies, who tells your story. And
Mm,
I get tingles just thinking about that quote because I'm I'm here. I'm
yeah,
alive. I want to tell my story. I know memoir is a genre where, thank God for memoir, because it's literally the definition of memoir is telling the story through your own eyes. I
mhm,
understand my mom has her story, my sister has her story, my dad has his story, but I want to say it from where I am. And
mhm.
I mean,
That's
yeah.
Yeah, that's where the healing is, and that's really what's so powerful. I recently did a podcast called Our Past or something, and it really is. And how do we want to tell our story? Are we the victim or the victor? And how do we retell it? Because human nature is, you go to where you have three kids, and I have three kids, and I spoke of an experience when I took the three kids out to ice cream, and later I heard them retelling what happened, and it was three totally different stories. It doesn't mean one is right or wrong or what, but for my oldest son, that was his experience, and for my middle son, that was his experience, and for my youngest, that was his. And then I had my own experience, and they're all equally, they happened.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate, I love how you wrote this book, and I would love listeners to go to get it, because I love how you broke it into two parts, and that was really super helpful. And in your past and your journey for sure is one that hopefully not many have have experienced with the I mean your retelling of being in your room and literally starving and being in school and all of that it reads like a very good fiction book, although I know it's not fiction. And then at the same time, you do speak to universal truths that many of our listeners have had. And if they haven't, they're fortunate in this, that, we are too much. We're too, you're too big, you're too loud, you're too, I was looking for the part in your prologue where you mention it, and I can't find it, but I love how you talk about how, like, you're either too much or you're too little. You're either speaking up too much or you're,
Mhm.
um, not speaking, you're being aloof and selfish,
Yep.
and you really help us in that journey. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And I think, gosh, so much in just of what you just said, but I think I had to come to the place where I can accept that my story and narrative is different. You talk about your
Mhm.
sons going for ice cream. Well, you can't, I mean, you guess you could get mad at them and say, wait a minute, I was doing something nice. What, you didn't like your strawberry cone or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Um, I think I need to accept that my parents have a very different side of things. And in fact, it was really painful for a long time because they were like, Kristen, what are you talking about? You had a great childhood. You weren't abused. You weren't raped. You weren't, for sure. But there were things that weren't, obviously, that weren't seen because the intention. And I think let me just caveat this and say, I do think my parents did the best that they could. I love my parents. I know
Mhm.
you have, I am so intrigued whenever you talk about your parents. I'm like right there. I'm like really connected to you when you speak of them because it was almost like breaking my own heart when I
Mhm.
pulled away from them. It was like, I mean, who wants to be broken up from their mother? Nobody. That's an
Unless
attachment,
it is unless it's an
right?
unhelpful relationship, right? Yeah.
But at the same time, how am I going to grow? How am I going to heal? How am I going to get rid of this anxiety? How am I going to do all these things? And I mean, you just saying those words about the writing, I just want to again tap that in because when I started going to therapy about 15 years ago, weekly, sometimes bi-weekly, it was the witnessing that
Mhm.
I found the most healing. It was someone saying, I hear you. I see you. I believe you. I'm taking you seriously. You are not little. In
Mhm.
fact, let's look at this. You've been making yourself very, very little. And just to give you a little bit of background, like you spoke about with the church, I felt like I really was oppressed, not to use a dramatic word, but truly oppressed in three different main areas of my life: my home life,
Mhm.
my church life. I went to a very evangelical, charismatic church. They were doing things like exorcisms at camp and being slain in the spirit. And for your listeners that don't know what that is, may I just describe that
Yes,
briefly?
please. Yeah.
Okay. So, because it wasn't until I was an adult that I was like, and I asked my husband, I was like, what do you mean you don't know what slain in the spirit is? What are you talking about? You don't do that at your church. It's literally where there's an altar call, and I remember being about 10, and this happened every Sunday. It wasn't
Mhm.
just a one off. Every Sunday, people were invited from the congregation, my friend's parents, or the lady in the big fluffy skirt and the hat, all the people that I was always surrounded by, invited up to the front. They stood in a line, and the pastor would come over and touch one by one the person on the forehead, pray over them in tongues. So you
Mm.
really had no, like, what the heck is going
What are
on?
they
And then the
saying?
person
Right.
would
Oh my gosh. Oh.
fall over backwards. There would be an usher there to catch them. They would then lie them on the floor. So one by one, you had about 30 people lined up on this red carpet. And all I could think was, they're dead. They're dead. They're going to have to bury them in the back of the church.
Oh
What
my
am I
God.
witnessing?
Yeah.
And what I was taught was that this was normal.
Mhm.
But and maybe
Well,
it
the
is.
fear that that puts in so yes, you playing small at home, playing small in the church because, oh my goodness, we don't want that happening to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I
then it
wanna circle back to what you were just saying about what was so helpful with therapy is being heard and having that space, because that is what happens to so many of us is this: we are taught to not trust ourselves, that whether we have the experiences you had, or we just have that experience of at some point crying and someone saying you're too sensitive or you're too emotional, and it's like, right there, that is invalidating. You are emotional, you're having your experience, and them putting a judgment on it that it's too much or it's right or it's wrong
yeah.
starts, if that happens time and time again, we disconnect from ourselves and we learn to not trust ourselves. So then when we are now adults looking for that acceptance of ourselves, having another adult, and certainly a professional, validate that and say, yeah, it's okay. That did happen and that wasn't okay. Yes, your parents were doing the best they could, and that was harmful. And it might have been an okay raising for your sister. It was not for you. And that's okay. It's interesting to me, I'm a coach, so I also work one on one with people. And what our brain tends to do is then go back and, like, we either completely discount it and shut it down, or we go back and embellish it because it has to get like it must be, yes, you're saying you weren't molested, you weren't, you didn't have these experiences, but you had trauma and you had the physical feeling of just total drama. So we're like, well, what was going on? And until we get the person that's saying your experience was traumatic enough, that was okay, that then brings us that ability to sit there and the, I guess the journey for you and for me is to not have that person that is saying, yes, it's okay, be our parents. That was for me, I had to let go of having my parents see that my experience was difficult, or my sisters to see that it was difficult, that for me to know it was difficult was enough, and
Yeah.
that they can have their opinions about it.
You know what? But for a long time, I was like really pissed about that. In therapy, I'd be like, nope, I don't want to butterfly hug myself. I don't want to tell myself it's okay. I don't want to breathe through it. I don't want to invoke this mother figure. No, 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 no. I missed out. I want my mom to be different. And I tried that road. I
Yeah.
tried it. And to your point, I think it really took an acceptance, and I kind of grumble because it took an acceptance of, okay, they're limited. And my therapist always used to say, they have this slice of the pie. Their life is this. You want your life to be this whole Boston cream pie. And guess what? Your parents have this little sliver. And I just kept going back to that idea. Okay,
Mhm.
they were not capable for whatever reason. My mom's dad being an alcoholic, all the backstory.
Mhm.
They were not able to give it to me. I then, when they met me with this shock and anxiety and all these reactions as a little kid, I didn't have the agency to say, okay, that's them.
Yeah.
That's them being freaked out by my energy or whatever, and it's not me. And I think, I
It's
don't know what.
not me. It's not me. That's the piece. It's not me. Because as a kid, that we need that attachment. There, but as an adult now, it is to return to that. It's not me.
Yeah.
I love that you shared that about the pie. I'm going to share a story that helps me with my parents. It's from, I heard it from Tara Brach, and so some old Buddhist tradition somewhere, but of a dog and a tree. And so we're walking through the woods and you see this cute, adorable dog, or I guess for you it might be a kitten because I hear that you love kittens.
Yes.
You see a dog by the tree and you go to pet it, and the dog snarls and bites your hand, and you back up, and in your backing up, you realize that dog is caught in a crazy trap that there's nothing you can do. You cannot get the dog out of the trap. And so that dog is your mother, and you can't get her out of that trap. The trap is her past, maybe her alcoholic father, maybe, her own stories about what it means to mother, etc. And then you get to choose whether you keep going back to get bit by that dog. And that is something that we can get angry that the dog's in the trap, and that the dog is what it is, and that they aren't that, what I also have a podcast on manuals, sort of like what a mother manual should be, what a mother should look like, what a mother-daughter relationship should be like. And we need to throw those manuals out.
Mhm.
That just creates missed expectations. But we can get
Mhm.
super, angry the dog is caught in that trap, but it's our decision to keep going back. And I've chosen not to go back to my family and keep getting bit by that dog. I went back, I tried to set boundaries, and it's like, okay, you know what? Now I'm not gonna go back anymore because I can't do anything
But
about that
don't
dog.
you also think, like, there's a part of me that's like, I'm glad I at least tried.
Mhm.
Just confirm that the dog indeed was trapped. I'm
Yeah.
glad maybe I shouldn't have tried for so long, for years and years and years. It was super painful,
Mhm.
but I'm glad I see the dog is fully trapped.
Well, and I'm going to say that like maybe I shouldn't have tried for so many years. I'm going to say that we needed to. You needed to as many times go back to try to pet that dog, and then suddenly you don't need to. I say don't argue with the past. The past always wins. It happened exactly as it was meant to happen. You were meant to go back, for 15 years or 10 times or whatever. And then when we learn the lesson, then it's time to learn the lesson. Similar to how you wrote the book. You were like, when am I going to write? When am I? And then, wow, look at that. Now is the time. And
I
it's
also, to your point, absolutely 100%. And to your point, I also feel like, okay, I learned the lesson, the dog's trapped. I'm not getting what I need. In fact, my hand is now a nub. But I need to engage. And this is why I love your podcast and podcasts like it. I need to now engage with community
Mhm.
that can lift me up, support me, shore me up. Podcasts, you know, friends that I can do the deep dive with, the therapy. Like if I didn't have that, I don't know. Maybe I would keep going back to the dog,
because you would keep thinking you're the one that's wrong. And
Yeah.
that is why, that's part of why I do this podcast. That's part of why I share what I share. That's part of why I got out of the marriage I was in and now am married to a new man, to show a vision of what's possible in marriage and a vision of what healthy relationship with my family looks like. A healthy relationship for me with my family is no contact. And I love them and I know they did the best they could. And I have no interest in having them in my life because I don't need to be bit every day. And it is this setting them free. And I guess part of that comes with this sort of belief in the world or the universe that if my mom or dad gets out of their trap, I'll find out.
Yeah.
But I don't need to
Yeah.
keep going back and checking.
Yeah, I
Um,
love that so much. We'll find out if you really have something's different. I think in therapy, what I've worked on is what you had spoken about earlier, which is not trusting ourselves.
yes.
I think there was a part of little Kristen that had this little itty bitty fire inside of her, warming her hands, trying like just a little feisty part.
Mm.
And I give her so much credit because she didn't I often say to one of my friends who had a similar experience with her mother that how did we not end up as heroin addicts in a ditch? How did that not happen?
You could have. Right.
And it's because I think I had this little girl, this little feisty side saying, "No, I'm not going to let myself down. There's some voice
I
in my
call
head."
that my inner warrior. I'm
Oh,
like, at some point, like she's poking, 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 poke, and then it's like throwing a boulder, throwing a rock. You're like, come on. But
yes.
yeah, and back to your writing and more, more evidence as to why listeners need to go get your book is you wrote so well of that and several different points of that little Kristen just not giving up and you having that fire and you having your own back. That's what I think our journey here on life is so much about, is that we go through the sort of the hero's journey and you go through this tumultuous in between time that happened when you were quite young
Yeah.
and then continued on until it's this like, hold on, I'm turning towards myself. I'm turning towards myself, and that may include it may include a relationship with your mom and it may not. There are many different paths, and I think what I'm hearing you say is that community is so important for you, and I love having community with open-mindedness, that it's like, yes, your path with your mom, if that works for you, that works. My path with my mom works for me. His path with his mom work, and it's just having this open, instead of these rules. No, you must call your mom on Mother's Day. You must let her in your house when she comes over. You must, yeah, a good daughter must. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think there are so many messages out there that's like Mother's Day in particular. I fucking hate Mother's Day. Because I don't think all my friends are like, but Kristen, you're the mom. Think of you and your mom, and my kids are lovely and they write me cards. I don't go there. I get stuck in no. My mom, Mother's Day is my mom. And
Mhm.
guess what? All the Hallmark cards,
Oh.
nope. No. That's not no.
Mhm.
So there's that. But the other thing I was going to say, which is why your life and your podcast, and I think that as a mom, I think our best tool is teaching by experience. What do our kids see? And listening to your story, and then listening to people like Tara Westover, who wrote
Mm.
Educated.
Yeah.
best book ever, changed my life. And I was like, oh my gosh. And she was one of the people that really inspired me to write my own story. And I
Oh,
was,
I'm so glad. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that story, come on. So, and I was like, oh, because hero's journey. Yes, it's the hero's journey. And she had that fire too. And she was like, I'm not getting it at home. I'm going to break my own heart. Because there's something else out in the world. I'm not sure what it is. For her, it was education. I'm going to get myself educated. She
Mhm.
pulled up her big girl boots and she went to all these Ivy League schools and she got
Got it.
educated.
But it
And
is so challenging,
yeah,
as you know too. And it is, that's another, I like crabs in a bucket. I don't know if you've heard of that, but this legit happens that if you put a bunch of crabs in a bucket and one of them has a little Kristen fire in her and she tries to climb out of the bucket instead of getting killed, she's trying to climb out and have that different future than what is modeled for her. The other crabs take that crab and pull her down. And if she doesn't pull down, they literally rip that crab limb from limb. And that is one of the, when I was setting different boundaries with my family and with my ex, it was very much, it's helpful to know that. And that, to know that when you are breaking out, those that are, where you were and sort of resting in that that pool of crab juice are not going to want you to break out. Tara did not, her family did not want her to go get educated. My family did not want me to. I remember my dad screaming at me and being like, you don't know what's right for you. I do. And it's like, okay, that worked when I was 12. I'm
right,
not 38. Right.
right.
And
I
it,
love, yeah,
but it
that
is to recognize that along the way and to make sure that the people you're surrounding yourself with are some of those people that are supportive literally of you, not trying to pull you down.
well, I love this example. I heard it on one of your recent podcasts, and just the visual of the crabs pulling you down is so visceral, right? I can just picture. And I think for a long time I was being pulled limb from limb. And it depends on who you surround yourself with. That's so cliche, I know. But what are you going to put in your ears? What are you going to put in front of your face? I've heard you say something similar. And I have people in my life and family members and friends that are like, can you just let it go now?
Yeah.
How many times did I hear, can you just let it go? I I and talk about anger. It makes me want to scream right now. And those are the people that either are not turning towards, because I don't think anyone has a free lunch. There are people, I don't care who you are, that have told me to let it go. And I'm like, sweet pea, you need to turn and look at your own mess over there. And that's another thing. I want to be surrounded by people who are turning towards it. And is it easy? Is it no, it is so messy, it is so hard, it's so, there's not a night that goes by where I don't have that little tinge of sadness.
Mm,
That and now my daughter, who is a teenager, and she's reading the book and she's having this real
mm,
reaction of
mhm.
who are my grandparents, and where do I fit in? And so we're having those conversations, and again it's like, okay, but mom had to, I want to love my life. I mean, you love your
Right.
life show. I don't want to be in the crab juice.
Mhm.
And I rather face it and sit in the pain. We all talk
Yeah.
about sitting in the muck, and I call it the muck. We used to go to a lake when we were little. My gram, who I adore, in New Hampshire, and my sister and I used to play in the muck, and it was so disgusting.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be
But
in the
you
muck.
sit in the muck. Well, I think to your point, it's how do you want to feel? You want to love your life. You don't want to sit in the muck. Even these other people who are saying, let it go, I always like to choose curious over furious. So when I feel myself getting pissed with people saying, why don't you call your mom on Mother's Day? Why don't you do? I just try to move to this, like, oh, isn't it interesting that they don't see this in a different way, or that they can't meet me here, or that's telling me something about them. And maybe I won't be interacting with them again. And again, there are some people who deserve to hear your story and some who don't. And I think that was Brene Brown or Oprah or someone like that who said, share your story once your wound has healed, and only share your story with those who deserve to hear it. And that is, you mentioned that in your book too, the arena. You're like, I'm in the friggin' arena, but people who are not in the arena are going to say, let it go. And that is, it's like, okay, they can. You're choosing not to because you're choosing to live that bigger life. And at the same time, one of my challenges is to not then judge people who are not doing the work, as you say, or moving along. And that's where I can get to curious. Instead of being the judge in the courtroom, I can be the detective and to be like, well, they're not ready yet. They aren't there yet. And they don't have that inner warrior, really clamoring on them. And then turning back towards yourself with how thankful I am that I do.
A
Um,
100,000%. I love that you said that. I think I do have a little bit of judginess, but I also think curiosity is probably my favorite kind of characteristic in myself and in other people. My therapist likes to say, pretend you're an anthropologist and say,
yeah,
huh, why are they acting like that?
yeah.
Why are they responding like that? And I really have, I feel like, made this turn. I don't know if it's the neuroplasticity in my brain because of my practice,
Mhm.
but I really can say that I know that friend loves me. I know that friend loves me. But that friend when can't quite meet me where I am right now.
Mhm.
I'm going to use that friend when I want to go jean shopping and
Mhm.
she can tell me if my bum looks good. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like she still has a valuable place in my life, but you know,
Well, and this is back to, yes. I like, that's a great opportunity for a boundary too, to say to that friend, hey, can we not talk about my relationship with my mother? I love being together with you. And I just like to not talk about my mom with you. And that might be hard to say, but that's where, healthy boundaries give healthy relationships.
don't you find that people though that really are not doing the work or facing it, they don't really even bring it up. They don't want to talk about it.
Right. They don't
Do
want,
you
which is
find
great, which is great. Or I find that people who have their own struggling relationship with their parents and they're telling themselves they need, they've got that manual. They're like, I need to be this daughter and go every Sunday, that they've bought into that story for themselves. So it makes them really freaking uncomfortable that you're that crab trying to, come out of that bucket. But
Yeah,
I do.
and then yeah, I was going to say, and then there's the exterior voices. You know, we've all talked about self-care. That's such a buzzword now, right? That have told me, well, you're being selfish. What do you mean put yourself first? You know, I hear from all my spiritual leaders like yourself, which is like put yourself first. How does this serve me? And there's a lot of response from people when I made the mistake, maybe I stopped doing this, but I made the mistake of really trying to be vulnerable and telling everybody my story,
Yeah.
try that
Yeah.
out. But people were like, no, 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 no. You put your kids first. You
Mhm.
put do your kids need to see your grandparents and they da, 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 da. And so I think it is this shift of like, I'm not being selfish by saying, how does it serve me? Because to, I know I've heard you say things like this too. It's like, if I find peace and rest and know that I'm making the right decision, I'm going to be better off in how I parent my kids.
Mhm.
Right?
100%. I love, so my kids are older. My youngest now is 16, but I have my decisions about my relationship with my parents, and they now are of the age where they can have their decisions. And I like to remind people of what a relationship is that we have one person, you, and then the other person, your mom, and then the relationship exists between you. So, your kids are going to be a different person and they're going to have a different relationship. I have found that my kids are able to have a relationship with my parents where they just feel love from my parents, and they have learned how to set boundaries from my model. And then my saying, yeah, if it works for you, go for it. And if it doesn't, then no, but to let them know that they are free to have whatever relationship they want.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, my parents, showing up the way they are as that piece of the pie, as you say, they're going to make that relationship be a certain way, no matter what, that is on them to, that's their burden to bear, or their piece of it, so that my kids know, yeah, this is grandma and grandpa. This is, they are that quarter slice
Yeah.
of the pie, and that's okay. Yeah.
Isn't there a nice sense of freedom for you in that? Because I know my daughter now will Marco Polo. I don't know if you
Yeah.
know. Yeah, okay. Marco Polo with my parents, and yeah, 100%. I feel the same way. You guys, I don't want to influence you. This is my story. This does not have to be your story. You can have, maybe you'll have a lovely relationship. You guys can mold that.
It's a neat opportunity to really sort of not be in this codependent, like just because I'm upset, you need to be upset too. But it's more this, no, I have a relationship with my parents that does not have to be yours. And I also I'm remembering one of my clients who has a similar situation with her mom, and her kids are much younger, 10 and under, and they do FaceTime with the grandma, and it's just she's taught them how to face, and sometimes they say, I don't feel like FaceTiming grandma, and she said, that's fine. Yeah, you just tell her in a polite, like she's teaching that the boundary of, yes, a boundary is you tell people how you want to be treated in a kind and appropriate way. So you say, grandma, I don't want to FaceTime you 3 times a week. Once is good, or whatever it is. And that is okay. And if grandma reacts to it, then that then defines that relationship between the grandchild and the grandparent. But the more I can back out, and it's interesting because in my experience, my parents possibly, like, my kids have benefited because they are possibly sort of gone to the other extreme of trying to spoil my kids and let me show Susie how we're, and it's like, go for it, pour love on them, like that is great. So,
Interesting. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it is
Interesting, right?
it is interesting. But I want to circle back because you mentioned community as being important to you. Are there some other things that you now do to keep your mental health, some practices or habits where you take care of yourself? Because with the past that you've had, and the past that all of us have had, mental and emotional health, we get triggers all the time. And this show being the Love Your Life show, I do like talking about practices and ways that we set ourselves up for that.
For sure. And I think if you don't for me, if I don't shore myself up with some of these things, it I can get really caught in my head. One is obviously writing.
Mm.
Another is body work. I've discovered massage therapy. I found this person that does Reiki, and she does pressure points. She's amazing.
Oh.
She put sage in the room. And I have to say, when she was working on, we all know that the body keeps the score.
Mhm.
Best part of that book is the title, I think, because,
I Yeah, as a
right?
reminder, I'm like, here,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
body
yeah.
does keep the score.
Body keeps the score. Oils. She was working on me, and this is maybe the third time that I had gone to see her, and the entire I started crying, as one
Mm.
does on a massage table sometimes,
Yeah.
and the whole outline of the book came to me.
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't like I was pressing into it, what am I solving? It was just boom, 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 boom. Just a 5-word outline. I went into the car, I wrote the 5 outline on my phone, and I went from there. And it was, I feel like, just a relief physically,
Mm.
because for so long when I was little, and I am little, I'm 4'11". I
Wow.
honestly, and my family is not a bunch of giants. We're all pretty small, but I do feel like, and my mom would disagree, that part of my growth was I was physically stunted. I really felt like let's talk about starving, emotionally, physically starving, issues with, purging and all that stuff. But I feel like, I used to tell my therapist, I think there's a big round concrete ball in my stomach, and I
Mm.
can't get rid of it. It can't come up and it can't go down. How do I get rid of it?
Mhm.
And I think it's been this process of just, with the therapy. That would be the other thing I said. I hate giving advice. I don't want to give advice, but oh my gosh, it's so easy to do therapy now.
Mm. Oh,
I'm
it's so easy.
right. I'm going to wrap my husband out because he says he now wants to be an example. Yay, Brent. He is now doing online therapy. He is
Oh,
now
yay.
on an antidepressant. And I have to say, he is a different human because of it.
Mhm.
And it's been we've always had like a very deep connection, blah blah blah, but seeing him work on his own things. So I mean, Zoom
I just need to
therapist.
pause you right there because
Yeah.
my husband is a life coach and he works with men, and there is such a stigma around men reaching out for support with their mental and emotional health. And yet, for women, like there's nothing sexier to me than a man taking care of his mental and emotional health. And like, oh my gosh, bring it on. And I just
So hot right now.
love, yes, that openness and that vulnerability to try to be the better man. We are not taught this stuff. And that is so much of, I appreciate, I don't hear it as you giving advice, but you saying what works for you and therapy works for you. I obviously am in the profession I'm in because, I believe in it wholeheartedly, coaching and therapy. I had a therapist for years and then now have moved into having a coach now. It is just like, why not? We do, it's not like you do one ab workout and you're done. It is this forward movement of consistently tweaking and seeing where we have growth to do and learning. And you and I too. I mean, we are continually going to be learning. So we're going to continually be learning, we're going to be coming up against different issues in our parenting that affect us from our past and in our marriages and in just whatever relationship. And to be open on that learning path is something that will serve us all the time. So
Totally. And it's like, I think, like you said, it's a work in progress. Like, I don't feel like I'm ever going to be really done.
well, I don't think it's helpful for us to think you reach a line and say it's,
Yeah.
I know that I only coach women now, but I know there are a couple men that I did coach back in the day when I was getting started. And after the third session, one of them was like, okay, so are we done now? I'm fixed. I was like, oh my God, okay.
Are you done yet?
Like, right, you had your one green smoothie, you don't need it again.
Oh my gosh, we could totally talk about males and their emotional development for an entire day,
And
because
it's okay because we also have it with females, and it's just this, I think we do ourselves a disservice thinking we are perfect when we come out. And then our whole life, I mean, talk about the church, it's like the whole life is trying to stay in that way. And if you sin or if then you're damned. It's like, no. We are all imperfect and we will forever be imperfect. And it is just allowing ourselves that imperfection and those outbursts and then okay, what can I learn from that? How can I get 1% better tomorrow?
that's
And
right.
moving on that path. So
That's why I love your little nuggets of wisdom, because they are so digestible and practical. I was just going to say, sometimes, like, I grew up living in this black and white, good and evil way, and I think if we open that up a little bit, because guess what, all this gray area, this is where you're living.
yeah.
I don't want to it's not helpful to categorize people and things and events. It's like back to the curiosity thing.
Mhm.
Let's be curious. Like, why did I act like that? You had this great podcast the other day, and it was, oh my gosh, the sweeper. The
Oh, the
sweeper.
street.
Oh my gosh. I have to tell you, I had a street sweeper moment this morning. In fact, when my husband promised me he'd fix the speaker on my laptop before I talked to you today.
Right.
And guess what? He didn't.
Oh,
So, what is it? Big A, or no, little A, anger?
yeah, that's a
Yeah.
little anger. Let
And
it
I was
go.
like, why am I so angry? And I said, why? Okay. This is a good moment. Why am I so angry? And I said, well, I I come by it legitimately, because I had so many years growing up where people didn't meet my needs. I
Mhm.
had a need. I asked for that need.
Yep.
I emailed that need. I need this. I need this. And still it didn't happen. And what that said, that messaging when I was younger was, you're not important.
You
I
don't
don't see
matter.
you. You don't matter. You're not worthy. I don't care what you're doing.
Your need is dumb, whatever it is. It's
Right.
like, right.
So I probably owe Brent, my dear beloved, an apology.
Yeah.
I'll call him the street sweeper.
That is the beauty of we can always go back and clean up our messes. And it is not Brent not fixing your speaker that made you angry. It was your thought about him not fixing your speaker that made you angry. And one of the great, circling back to the importance of coaching and therapy, is that whenever we have a bigger reaction to a small event, that is coming from something. And you just said what yours was coming from, this past and all of us. And so it is about, challenging our thoughts so that we can live this life that we love. And I credit you so much for being on this path and doing, the quote unquote work. It is not easy, and yet it is the path towards greater happiness. That when we ignore it and we push it down and we just pretend it's not there, we really are living in a state of suffering that I don't think is necessary.
Right.
And opening ourselves to these gray experiences and feeling the wonderful and the pain is how we move through life. So I want to finish by again telling listeners to go get your book. I also, you have an amazing business that, when we're talking about things that you do for your mental health, I'm imagining designing. That's kind of neat. That's something that came up from the very beginning for you. Can you tell us a little about your business?
Oh, thank you for the chance to do that. Yeah, I write a blog and have a business called Blue Egg Brown Nest. And I refinish furniture. I've done it for about, I don't know, over 10 years now. And I blog about interiors. And it originated as part of my healing, absolutely, because it was the idea of how do I create space that is a respite, I don't think it's bad to spend a little bit of money on something beautiful in your space that you can breathe in
Mhm.
and feel good about. So, and obviously, there's a lovely metaphor in there about taking a old brown junky piece of furniture and painting it, covering it up with the beautiful paint color and transforming it and then putting it into your house with a sense of pride. It's no longer grandma's coffee table in the attic. It is now my gorgeous coffee table that looks like a knockoff from Serena and Lily.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
at a quarter of the price.
Yes.
So yeah, so I have a blog and I
I
love
will put
love
links
connecting.
to all of that in the show notes, including your book. And I am so grateful to be able to bring your message to listeners and watchers. And I just am so honored that you are here doing the work that you're doing and shining your light out and putting this message out there to give that bite of hope and it's set, showing people there is a different way, that if they are having any piece of the experience that you had, that there is another path forward. And, yes, you move through the discomfort, and yet at the other side, it's shiny bright. So thank you, Christen, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Susie. You are a light.